Hey guys, it's Raul again, and today I'll be sharing with you a list of books that have surprised me the most. So the books on this list are ones that I went into fairly blindly. I hadn't read anything by this author before, or I had either heard some negative things about some of these books or some of these authors, and I just went into their books not really knowing what to expect and ended up loving them. A lot of these authors ended up becoming auto-buy authors or favorite authors or favorite books of all time kind of thing. So yes, I decided to go ahead and compile a list and share those with you guys today. Now the first book on this list is Intensity by Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz is one of my absolute all-time favorite authors. I haven't mentioned him on my channel in a while because I just haven't really read anything by him in a long time, but for a time I was absolutely obsessed with this book. Intensity was the first one by Dean Koontz that I had ever read. I remember I picked this book up from the library years and years and years ago and absolutely ended up falling in love with it. And after I read this book, I had to read everything by Dean Koontz. I was on this binge where I just was picking stuff up one right after the other, back to back, and I just wanted to read so much Dean Koontz. I think that's probably why it tired myself out after a while and just haven't picked something up by him in a long time. But for a while, this is literally all I was reading was Dean Koontz for a good couple of years. I think I've gotten through about 22 or 23 of his books and have really loved some of them, have really not enjoyed others. But Intensity, I love it. This has a very, very special place in my heart for it being not only the first Dean Koontz book that I've read, making it be the book that made me fall in love with this author and with his writing style, but it was just so dark and gruesome. It follows our main character, China, who is she's on this trip to go visit family, and on her way there, she kind of witnesses something that she shouldn't have witnessed, so she decides to kind of follow this man to his house, who is apparently keeping this girl hostage, and she's now taking it upon herself to try and save this girl that she thinks this man actually has captive. And yes, this is so disturbing, so great, so intense. I mean, the title says it alone, Intensity. It is one of my absolute favorite books ever, one of my absolute favorite books by Dean Koontz. And yes. And the next book on this list is a book by an author that I told myself years ago I was not interested in reading, and that is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I am a very, very big Colleen Hoover fan now. I remember years ago I did a tag video somewhere where one of the questions was an author that you're not interested in reading, and I mentioned Colleen Hoover as an author that I was not interested in picking up her books. At the time, a lot of people were reviewing Slammed, which was her first novel, really didn't like it, really said it was very problematic, and that's kind of all I was hearing about Colleen Hoover, was that she writes these problematic romances that I just wasn't interested in reading. But then It Ends With Us came out, and I was hearing amazing reviews about this one, about how you should go into this one fairly blindly and just kind of enjoy the ride, and I ended up just picking this up in audiobook from the library because it was available, and telling myself, you know what, I'm just going to listen to this and see what happens, and this book made me fall in love with Colleen Hoover. I've read a bunch of books by Colleen Hoover since then. I've gotten my wife into this author as well, and I just really, really love her books. I love her adult contemporaries. I've mentioned in my channel before how I prefer kind of adult contemporaries over YA contemporaries. So yes, Colleen Hoover is definitely one of my favorite adult contemporary writers out there, and this is the book that kind of started it all for me. And the next book on this list of books that really surprised me is Demon by Tosca Lee. I recently mentioned this book in a previous video about how this is a Christian fiction book, but more of a darker kind of take on Christian fiction, and this really made me realize how Christian fiction can really appeal to someone like me who likes kind of darker, grittier reads. It follows our main character, who is a reporter and is visited by this man or this entity called Lucian, who comes to visit him and tell him his story. He says that he needs to tell him the story, then he needs to write it down and publish his story. Lucian takes many different forms throughout this book, so he doesn't appear to our main character in the same body every time that he comes to him, but starts telling him kind of this dark story about the creation of humanity. It follows what we essentially know in modern time as Lucifer, and starts telling him the story of the creation of humanity, of how he was kind of cast out of heaven and everything, his growing and increasing hate for God and God's creation, and I absolutely loved this book. Tosca Lee ended up becoming another one of some of my favorite authors. I have not read some of her most recent books, but I really, really adored this book and some of her other Christian fiction that she has written. I think it's absolutely incredible, and this, like I said, just made me realize that Christian fiction doesn't have to be all one note, and there are other different kind of layers and stuff to Christian fiction, and I loved this one. And the next book on this list is Permanent Record by Mary H.K. Choi. This book is probably one of my absolute favorite contemporary novels. I absolutely loved this one. I believe this was more new adult instead of YA. It's my first Mary H.K. Choi book that I've read, and only one so far. I mean, I have her first novel that I haven't read still, Emergency Contact, but Permanent Record ended up being one of my absolute favorite reads of, I believe it was 2019 when I read it, and I loved this one. I just love the fact that it is a romance, but it is kind of a more of a messed up kind of romance. It's not like your typical boy meets girl, they fall in love, they live happily ever after type thing, very lovey-dovey and bubbly, and like there's a lot of messed up stuff throughout here. I mean, you have these two main characters who come basically from two completely different worlds. You have Pablo, who kind of falls in love with this pop star, and just kind of the struggles that they have, just him being from this kind of very urban part of New York City, I believe it is, that he lives in, and then just meeting this pop star and kind of falling into her world without really knowing what's going on and what to do and how to act and everything, and just his struggles. I absolutely loved Pablo's voice literally from the very first page. From the first page of this novel, I loved this main character, and I just wanted to be a part of his world and be a part of this story, and this is one that completely took me by surprise. I knew that I was going to enjoy it going into it, but did not realize that I was going to love it as much as I did until I actually picked it up and read through this one. And the next book on this list is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This made me probably fall in love with classic literature. Up until this point, I had read quite a few classic books in school and everything, and I was just doing it because it was part of an assignment. I had to write a paper or take a test or something about it. So I was reading it because I had to, not because I was really loving a lot of the stuff that I was reading at the time. But Great Expectations kind of really changed that for me. This is a book that I absolutely loved. I want to reread at some point. I keep telling myself every year that I'm going to reread Great Expectations and then end up never getting to my reread. But I absolutely loved this novel. Again, one of my all-time favorite classics, and a book, again, that kind of sparked my interest in wanting to pick up classics and wanting to really enjoy and delve into this kind of literature and these kind of themes and everything of this time. I absolutely adored this one. And the next book on this list is Scythe by Neal Shusterman. This is my first kind of foray into Neal Shusterman. I know that he's a very well-known YA author, but I had never read anything by him before. I picked up this book on a whim because I had gotten a gift card from Barnes & Noble during Christmas time, and I still remember this, and I went onto their site to kind of browse and see what I can get with this gift card. This ended up being on the list of kind of new releases that had just come out that week or something. This title and this cover caught my eye. I read a little bit of the synopsis and just ended up picking it up on a whim. I hadn't heard absolutely anybody talk about this book at all at the time. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I fell in love with this series. This trilogy is one of my all-time favorite YA trilogies ever. I absolutely love the themes of this. If you guys have not read Scythe before, I highly recommend it. This is a YA dystopian series that takes place in somewhat of a near future where death does not exist. So there's an entity in this world called the Thunderhead, which is kind of what we know now as like the Cloud. So the Cloud kind of, stores all of this information and everything that you kind of, give it to store. And then the Cloud ends up kind of becoming this worldwide dominant entity that is now called the Thunderhead. And the Thunderhead kind of manages life. Has become so strong that death no longer exists. People are kind of, resurrected, and no one is able to die until the Thunderhead says that they're able to. And in this world, you have the Scythe that are kind of ordained to control the population. So they're the ones going around actually choosing who is going to die to kind of control the population of humanity, because obviously no one is naturally dying anymore. And yes, this is just absolutely incredible. The two main characters at the very beginning of this first book are chosen to be Scythes. Neither of them want to really be a part of the society, because nobody wants that responsibility of having to kill people or being kind of chosen to kill people, because nobody really wants that job. And so many things happen in this trilogy. The second book is literally one of my favorite books of all time, and this series is just absolutely incredible. If you guys have not read this one, again, I highly recommend it. Just so many themes about life and death and religion and morality that are just absolutely incredible throughout this entire series. The next book on this list is a little bit of a controversial one, but I'm fine with that, and that is Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. This is another book that had so much controversy surrounding it when it first came out. I remember when ARCs were coming out, a lot of people were talking about how offensive it was and how controversial it was, and a lot of people ended up not picking it up because of all of these early reviews and people just saying how it was racist, I ended up picking up this book anyways because I was really, really curious, because I'm that kind of person. If somebody says you can't do something or everyone is going this way, then I kind of want to go the other way and do the opposite that everybody else is doing. So I ended up picking up this book because I was just completely curious to see what everybody was talking about, why everybody was so offended, and I did not understand why people were getting so offended with this book. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I've talked about this one before. I've seen a couple of videos before of people that have actually read finished copies of this and not understood what this whole offense was surrounding this book, but I really, really loved this book. This is a YA science fiction story that I just fell in love with this world and fell in love with the politics within this world and the magic system, and I really loved it. This is a series that I've read both of the books already. I've really enjoyed this duology, and it's a duology that I honestly would love to reread at some point and take my time and really delve into this world again. If you guys enjoy kind of politically driven YA science fiction, I highly recommend you guys picking this up, because I, again, don't really see the issue that was surrounding this book when it first came out. And speaking of politically driven YA science fiction, the next book on this list is The Diabolic by S. Kincaid. This is another book that, people were getting random arcs here and there when it first came out, but I never really saw anybody actually read it and review it. So I was super curious again when this book came out. I really, really loved this cover. I was attracted to this cover and the name and everything, and didn't really know what to expect going into it. All I knew is that I had seen people that had received arcs, and that was it. So this is again another one that I absolutely ended up loving. I have read the first two books in this trilogy and own the third book and want to read that one very, very soon, but I loved this one. I loved the politics in the world in this. I think that's what attracted me to it when I first started reading this book, is just everything that was going on politically within this world, everything that was going on, within our main character Nemesis, who is a diabolic. She's pretending to be somebody else because she is deemed illegal in this world where cyborgs are told that they're too dangerous to be around other people. So everyone, all of the cyborgs start kind of getting deactivated. Nemesis hides out, and she is pretending to be the daughter of a big politician in this world. And yes, I mean, I loved this. I loved this series. I loved this first book. I really enjoyed the second one. I love where everything is going. I'm really excited about the third one. And this is one that I highly recommend. Again, if you guys like politically driven YA science fiction, this is one you definitely have to check out. The last book on this list is A Million Junes by Emily Henry. I've mentioned Emily Henry before. I've done a whole kind of author highlight video, which I will link on the screen if you guys would like to go watch that. But Emily Henry is one of my all-time favorite authors. She is an auto-buy author for me. Anything and everything that she comes out with, I will buy, because I have loved almost everything that she has written, and A Million Junes was the first novel by her that I have read. This was my first pick from Book of the Month, because I had just recently subscribed to Book of the Month, and this was the first Book of the Month box that I had ever gotten. I saw it on their list. I kind of read the little blurb and thought it was interesting and picked it up, not really knowing what to expect, and yes, I was just pleasantly surprised with how much I loved this novel, and how much of a favorite author Emily Henry became after this. She's absolutely incredible. I remember everything, just experiencing this book and experiencing Emily Henry's writings for the very first time. I loved this one, and I'm so glad I read this one. I'm so glad I picked it up. I'm so glad I fell in love with Emily Henry. And yes, another one that I highly, highly recommend. If you guys have not checked out this author, again, check out that video doing the author highlight and see which book of hers you would love to pick up, because anything by her I'd recommend. So yeah guys, that is it for a list of books that absolutely surprised me. Comment down below and let me know some of your favorite books that surprised you, some books that you went into blindly not knowing that you were going to end up loving as much as you did. Before you go, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I post videos every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all next time.